So this notion between the working mind thoughts and the thinking mind thoughts is really important. Otherwise, we might think that the mission is to have no thoughts. Now, no thinking when you are doing certain explorations in order to become aware of awareness, no thinking in those explorations is very valid, because even the thinking of the working mind can get in the way of a revelation of this formless awareness that is the background to everything. But if we are just living in daily life and not doing a particular exploration, then the working mind is part and parcel of us actually being functional human beings. If we prayed to God, please God, take all my thinking away. My thinking is my suffering. I don't want to think. Take it away. Then once again, let's hope God doesn't oblige, because if He did, we would find ourselves in a really precarious situation, because we wouldn't know how to wash ourselves, we wouldn't know how to eat, we wouldn't be able to talk to the other, we wouldn't be able to calculate anything. We basically wouldn't be able to function in life. So once again, the Chinese proverb, be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. So this means we have to be clear on what components are the problems and what components aren't. And that way our awareness starts to become aware of the fine details.
So you said the working mind doesn't have any suffering. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yes. It doesn't produce suffering. It doesn't. The working mind is not part of the attitude of personal doership and attachment to outcomes. It is functional. It doesn't. The working mind, the pure working mind, doesn't know how to insist on life being a particular way. It doesn't believe that its happiness is to be found in the outcomes. The working mind knows that outcome would be more pleasurable to me than that outcome. So I will work towards that outcome, but I won't be attached to it actually happening. Meaning I won't feel defined by whether it happens or not. The thinking mind says that outcome is more pleasurable than that outcome, so I am going to make that outcome happen using my control in life, and I'm going to make it happen and engage in it as if that pleasure is a matter of life and death to who I am. That if the pleasure doesn't eventuate, that is an attack on who I am. So you can see when the thinking mind is working and driving us, we're a disaster zone. Our relationship to circumstance and to what we can actually, how we can function is completely misguided. The working mind, on the other hand, doesn't have that misguidance in it. However, when the two exist in the system, because the working mind is part of your biological intelligence, so everyone has the working mind. But the problem is nearly everyone has the thinking mind. So the thinking mind infiltrates and infects everything that the working mind is working towards. Artists, painters, dancers, someone who enjoys gardening, from time to time has the experience when they are fully involved in an activity where the thinking mind actually subsides and there is just the working mind happening, just the biological movement of the body. And that's why people become so they crave that state, because it is a state where they are in flow with life, where life is efficient and where creativity happens. So we can start to see that when the thinking mind falls away, we're not going to become chaotic members of society that is irresponsible. When the thinking mind falls away, our biological intelligence gets to function uninfected by the thinking mind.
So it seems as if the working mind is very unemotional, rational, and the thinking mind is emotional.
No, I wouldn't say that, because the working mind, which is part of the biological makeup of the body, includes emotion. So the biological intelligence of the body includes emotion. That's why there is emotional pain in the moment, even when the thinking mind has subsided. Right? So if we think that the working mind is just, dry and flat and logical, we're essentially not appreciating the complexity of the biological aspect of the human being. So when the thinking mind and the psychological identity has fallen away, we actually feel that love is available, that compassion is available, that sensitivity is available, that appreciation of art and of life is available, that gratitude is available, that awe is available. And all of those aspects are not at all, just mechanical, linear functions. So we have to appreciate the working mind doesn't make the mistake of attachment and doership, but it is a very complex functioning instrument. And so when I'm talking about the working mind, we can link it to the working mind as a part of the biological functioning of the body. Now often when someone hears biological functioning, they might think about the bladder or the liver filtering out impurities from our system. Okay, that's biological. The heart pumping, fingernails growing. The biological also includes our thinking of the working mind. It includes our emotions. They are part of the biological functioning. So essentially we separate the functioning of the human being into biological reactions and psychological reactions. The psychological reactions are the reactions based on the attitude of doership and attachment to outcome. The biological reactions are part of the functioning of the flow of life, part of the circumstance of the flow of life. And it includes emotions. So that separating of the psychological reactions and the biological reactions is very important. They are both happenings according to our genes and up-to-date conditioning. Both the psychological and the biological are not in anyone's control. They are happenings. And it's useful to get this conceptual distinction. Within the biological reactions, there is a subset that we are referring to as the working mind, which is a functional thinking. And it's also, you could say, there is the contemplating mind. But to me, the contemplating mind, which is contemplating my own existence, contemplating the concepts that are put forwards in spiritual practices, that to me is a subset of the working mind. But we might think the working mind is just about planning. And so then introducing this notion of the contemplating mind allows us to know, when I am thinking about spiritual seeking, that too is a working mind function that we're dividing off into the contemplating mind.
Is there a simple distinction between the working mind and the thinking mind? Like if there was one pointer I could think about.
The thinking mind is always your attitude to circumstance that feels uncomfortable. That's something we really have to become familiar with, is that the thinking mind, the psychological identity, whenever it is functioning, is uncomfortableness. And it's always based on this attitude of doership and attachment to outcome. So once that becomes really clear that that is what the thinking mind is, then everything else that is not that doesn't feel uncomfortable, that isn't guilt, blame, pride, worry, expectation. Everything that isn't that is essentially the working mind, and you know that when that's happening, it's not disturbing your peace of mind. The working mind might be disappointed about something. It might say, the working mind might say, looking back in hindsight, that investment decision really wasn't a good one. And it says so, and as a result, my life has now really needed to be reconfigured that is just an objective assessment, and it can include a disappointment, but it doesn't include in it regret and blame and shame. So we can see the biological functioning of the body, including the working mind, can feel the pain of a situation, but it doesn't turn it into this uncomfortable bitterness that the thinking mind does.
So the working mind is essentially being, right? In some ways.
Being is...
Because there's no suffering in it inherently.
Yes, so what you would say, you can say, is the working mind is not in opposition to peace of mind.
But it's not being.
No, being is, as I use the word, is a word to describe where we rest when we drop out of the thinking mind and connect to the core of ourself that is already complete. And then in that beingness, usually there isn't, in that beingness there is a sort of a sweetness, a softness. And it doesn't, it is prior to any thinking. So the working mind might be happening, but when you drop into being, what's center stage essentially, although ironically it doesn't feel like it's in the front, it feels like it's in the back, but what is the main sensation, or not sensation so much, but aspect, is this this resting. And so beingness is not really a something, whereas thinking is something. Beingness is reserved, that word, rest in your being, is reserved for a dropping into your core and stopping essentially. And once that's established, we can rest in being and still function.
So you can function without the working mind while you're just resting in the being in day-to-day life?
Well, if you rest in being, it might be that you're resting in being while doing nothing in particular, while looking at the sunset, for example, or sitting at a cafe and rest in being, and there isn't much that you have to function in. As that becomes more and more an available space that you are grounded into, you can actually have a conversation with someone while you are resting in being. Right? It doesn't pull you out of being. So you are talking is happening, and at the same time there is a centeredness. So if you're in an argument with someone, or you're not really in an argument, but if someone is a bit flustered and you are resting in being, what will happen is you'll be able to engage with them and say, listen, I understand you're upset, but let's look at it from a different perspective. It might help. And you remain centered in being, and yet you can function. As that centered in beingness develops, you can find yourself walking through the supermarket, picking what you need, maybe even reading some of the things, and remaining centered in being.
So you don't actually need the working mind at all in
no, but
sense.
When you are going through the supermarket and you look at maybe an ingredient to see whether it has certain type of fat in it that you are trying to avoid, or whether the sugar content is too high because you have diabetes, then you are grounded in your being, but you are registering, the sugar content is 30%, and no, that's not appropriate for my diabetes. So that is the working mind. So the fact that when things are just happening naturally, or we might think the working mind isn't there, but it is there in a form. You're not randomly just picking anything. There is a seeing, this is the coffee section, and your hand goes for the coffee. So that means that the coffee is seen, it's registered as coffee. That's all part of the working mind. You can see that that doesn't create suffering. So the working mind that picks up the coffee and then it says, oh, actually this one's on special, half price, and I remember having that brand, I'll take that one. That's the working mind. No suffering in that. Imagine you see this one half price and you go, damn it, why isn't the one that I want half price? I'm sure that the staff here, they don't know what people like. They put that would then be the thinking mind.
So we have been speaking today of the types of suffering, and when we look at them really close, it seems that the mechanism how they get delivered, they can be differentiated. But in the end, all of the sufferings or pleasures, they're a sensation felt in the body, right? And so why I'm saying this, because sometimes...
Sorry, wait.
Yeah.
All of the pleasures and pains are felt in the body. The suffering is our attitude, which is a psychological aspect, right? Still, you could say it's part of the body-mind organism. But the suffering really is on the level of thinking. And in its intense form, it's felt in the body, suffering.
Okay, so let's keep the intense forms then. So that's why I'm actually pointing or sharing this, that when it's intense, then sometimes it's difficult to contemplate, or the intellect is just gone for a toss. And so I find it very helpful to see in those moments that there is it is just a sensation which is very strong, and then I can relax into that much more than when I'm trying to analyze it or see it.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Actually, I mean, there are contemplating requires space, and so suffering is really the opposite of space and the opposite of contemplating. So if the suffering is intense, you can't contemplate, and if you have I should be contemplating, it just becomes more suffering. It intensifies the suffering. So if we understand that when the suffering is destined to be of a certain thing, if we're lucky, we can just surrender. If we're lucky, because that surrender already means there's a lot of understanding, right? And it can be that when the suffering is really intense, there's absolutely no understanding, which means no potential to even surrender to the suffering. Which is why the seeking has to happen, not when suffering arises, but we have to become earnest seekers, which means I just want to know this as part of understanding who I am, understanding life better. Not, I want to know this only when suffering is arising so that I feel better. And if we find the seeking happening when the suffering isn't happening, then when the suffering is happening, there is potential for that space, for there to be more space than if the seeking didn't happen before. Because even what you're saying is essentially, it's an insight, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it comes because there was an inquiry and a watching, an observation of life before the suffering, and it comes because when the suffering is really intense, you would have seen yourself trying to contemplate and how it doesn't happen. So all of that is because of so each time that is seen, each time you see, I try to contemplate and it doesn't happen, that's new conditioning. essentially. And so your recognition of that becomes part of your up-to-date conditioning, and then at some point when the suffering is intense, your movement is towards surrendering into it, or what was the word you used?
Accepting that there is heavy sensations and
feeling the sensation.
Feelings, yeah. So just dropping the thinking at all, just wait for it to pass and...
Yes. So that's why, in spiritual teachings, there are so many little things here and there to deal with all of these things. So this too shall pass is one of the wisdoms that is saying, you can't do something about it, but it will pass. So you can relax. Whereas if we don't know this too shall pass, when it's there, it feels like it needs to be dealt with. And if we think that it will only go away if we make it go away, then there is this involvement. And so this too shall pass is wisdom that says, you can't control these things, but they will change. The nature of life has changed. So when we get that, there's more non-doership that comes into the system. So what you are describing to me is the attitude of non-doership kicking in.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm.